Hello, my dear friends and fellow developers. Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are going to continue our journey in which we are discussing different topics related to our LWC framework. So, today in this session, we will discuss about events, how to handle the events in our LWC framework, and what are the use cases or what are the key points where we actually use events and how we can take more out of the events and use it in our LWC framework. So, let's begin. So basically, Lightning Web Component dispatches standard DOM events, and we can also create and dispatch our own custom events. So basically, with the help of LWC, we can dispatch any of the standard DOM events. So we are referring to our normal JS DOM events, and then we can also have our custom events which we can create and dispatch. So where basically these events are used. So basically events are used to pass data from child component to parent component. So we can use events to communicate up to the components containment hierarchy. So in this example, we have two components. We have child components, namely to do item, and we have parent components, to do app. So what basically it does is like the child component dispatches the event to tell its parent that a user has selected it. So basically it is passing the information from child to parent. Then Lightning Web Components events are built on DOM events. So this is one of the key point that all of the events which we are using in Lightning Web Components are totally built on DOM events, and it provides us a collection of APIs and objects that are all available in our every browser. Lightning Web Components implements event target interface. So basically, this is the interface which is event target, with the help of which LWC enables us to dispatch an event, listen to an event, or handle events. But LWC strongly recommends us that we should make use of custom event interface instead of event interface whenever we are working with any event handling or data manipulation, because custom event provides a more consistent experience across browsers including Internet Explorer. Now, one of the important point is like dispatching events or adding listeners to a capture phase. That means passing data down the hierarchy is not supported with the help of events. So what basically does is like it passes data from child to parent, or you can say child to parent and then to grandchild and so on. Now you might wonder that if with the help of event we cannot pass data down the hierarchy, then how we can pass the data? So to communicate up in the component hierarchy, we make use of event, which we just discussed right now. But if we want to pass the data in down the hierarchy, then we have to make use of HTML attributes or the public methods. So with the help of those things, we can pass data down the hierarchy. So how many ways are there by which we can handle the event? So basically there are two ways. One is the declarative way and second is the programmatic way. So in declarative way, we make use of HTML template, and in programmatic way, we make use of imperative JavaScript APIs. But it is always suggested that we should always make use of HTML template because it reduces the amount of code you need to write. So now let's see how we can attach event listeners declaratively. So in this example, we have two components in example namespace, namely owner and child. So in child component, we have a button, namely click me. And then what it does is like in parent component, we are making use of HTML attribute with the syntax of on event type. Okay. So now this is a button. So it will have its own DOM events. As we already discussed that it supports standard events. So click me, when you click on button, it will fire and click event, which can be handled by the parent component like this syntax, like on event type, which is on click event. And then we are having function over here. So whenever a button is clicked in the child component, which is listened by the parent with the help of on event type syntax, which is on click, and then in handle click, we can have our own functions or operations, whatever things we want to execute. So this is how we can attach event listeners declaratively. Now, if you want to see how we can do it in our JavaScript manner, or you can say programmatic manner. So basically, we have to define both listener and handler in the owner component JavaScript file. So basically, here also we have two components: parent HTML and child HTML. Similar example like the previous one, in which we have button in child component. So now the important thing is like to get a reference of example child, we are using this.template.query selector to handle the events on the handle click JavaScript file. So this is the syntax. So basically what it does is like whenever this LWC will be rendered, basically the parent LWC. So in rendered callback, we are simply querying it the example component, which is the example child, which is the namespace, then our LWC name, which is the child component. And then we are adding the listener with the syntax as dot add event listeners, which is on click event. So whenever we click this button, which is click button in our child component, so what it will do, it will simply add a listener on click, and then it will call this handle click function, which will do a further operation. So these are the two ways by the help of which we can attach and you can say handle the events in our LWC framework. Now, there are some key points which we need to remember whenever we are working with events or we can say handling events. So, basically, there are two syntaxes for adding an event listener. One adds an event listener to an element with a component shadow boundary, and one adds an event listener to an element that template doesn't own. For example, element passed into a slot. So, these are the two ways, or you can say two syntaxes, how we can add event listeners in our LWC framework. Now the important thing is like to add an event listener to an element within the shadow boundary, use template this dot template dot add event listener. That means if we are accessing any event or you can say any component in the same shadow boundary, so we can make use of this syntax like this dot template dot add event listener, and then we can add any event listeners to any component, and then we can use it the access accordingly. But let's suppose the other way around, if the template is not directly in the shadow boundary. So in that case, we should not make use of this. We can directly use this dot add event listener, and this is how it will work. So whenever the component will be in the shadow boundary, we have to make use of this dot template dot add event listener. And whenever it is not in the shadow boundary or the component doesn't owns the other component, so in that case, we have to make use of this dot add event listener. An event listener added via this dot add event listeners bind it to the host. Since it is not in the shadow boundary, so what it does is like it will bind it to the host element, which is the normal DOM element, which is the host. So that's how the bubbling and all the concepts work, because it is not in the shadow boundary. So with the help of this, since it is attaching to host element, it will simply follow the concepts of bubbling and everything. Now, what will happen? We are continuously adding event listener, event listener. So how it will be removed? So as part of the component life cycle, which is like the life cycle phase, how the LWC will be rendered and it will be removed from our DOM. So browser automatically manages and cleans up the listener. So we do not have to manually remove the event listeners in our LWC framework. So yeah, that is for the today's session. Hopefully, I was able to explain you what are events and how we can handle events. And there are two ways how we can handle the events. We also see some of the key points, or you can say some of the important stuff which we need to consider, like when to use this dot template and when to use normal add event listener. I hope I was able to explain everything. But if you have any doubts, you can comment that doubts in the comment section. I will be happy to answer. Thank you very much. Signing off for today.